380 words. 380 words, that's all it took for Ernest Hemingway to give you basically someone's entire life story through possibly what might be construed as the end of that person's life. If we know a little bit, well, if we infer a little bit about the time that is being mentioned here. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another short story discussion from Ernest Hemingway. We are in the midst of a short story by short story read along for the Finca Vigia edition. This is the 14th video in the Hemingway read along playlist here on the channel, but this video will also appear in the short story discussions playlist. This short story is known as The Revolutionist, or as I like to call it, The Communist Commute. So we will have a recap, a summary of what happened. We will have literary criticism, and then we have but one writer's note to get to from this short story. So what happened? Well, our speaker is telling the story of a Hungarian communist who has fled to Italy and the communists there to escape what is known as the White Terror, which was a counter-revolution wave of violence following the Red Terror, which was a revolutionary wave of communist violence. Much coercion, much torture, much killing is happening along the way for the subject of our story here, the Hungarian traveler. Notice that I am calling him that as opposed to something else, because we're going to talk a little bit about the title in the literary criticism section for this short story. So he gets to Italy, where the real interest he has is to see paintings, and he buys copies of the ones he likes. He does not like Montaigne, Joe Montaigne. So our speaker is the second contact in Italy for the Hungarian and is responsible for getting the Hungarian to Romania, from where he travels to Milan, then be on his way to Aosta, so that he can cross the Alps into Switzerland. The last our speaker hears of this Hungarian traveler, the Swiss had him in prison. Apparently, it does not pay to communist. Now, that first point there under the lit crit section, flash fiction. Remember, this is only 380 words of fiction. We get all of the backstory that I just talked about. We have characterization. We have art references. We have so many things going on in this short story. And here's the really wild thing to think about here. Yeah, it's 380 words of a short story, but essentially the first 220 words, Hemingway is giving us the same stuff twice. So there's not a whole lot really going on in the opening salvo for the short story, and we still get out in under 400 words. Now, remember, a flash fiction is anything under 1,000 words, and if you want to be particular about Hemingway, yes, he may be the greatest short story writer in American English. He's almost definitely the greatest flash fiction writer in American English. Here is what I consider to be the key to this story, and I'm hoping that maybe one of you has a better explanation than I do. It is told to us that the real interest our weary traveler has in Italy is the art. It's the art. He wants to see the paintings. He's so infatuated with the paintings that, despite the fact that he's a communist, he scrounges together the money to buy copies of the paintings. Okay, so let me find. I messed everything up here. I've already ruined everything, haven't I? We have here. He was delighted with Italy. It was a beautiful country, he said. The people were all kind. He had been in many towns, walked much, and seen many pictures. Giotto, Masaccio, and Piero della Francesca. He bought reproductions and carried them wrapped in a copy of Avanti. Montaigne he did not like. Now, here's an interesting bit about that little blurb there. These artists are all listed in chronological order. The first mentioned is Giotto, who lived from around 1267 to 1337. Then Masaccio from 1401 to 1428. Then Piero della Francesca from 1425 to 1492. And finally Montaigne from 1431 to 1506. So Giotto was the real outlier, being 100 years before any of the others. But really, the others follow in pretty quick succession there. The movements here, Giotto was Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, and the rest of these painters are. And look, I'm no expert in this. I have an interest in painting. I have an interest in the visual arts, but I am no expert here. So please correct me if I am wrong. The rest of these artists are in Renaissance eras. So the interesting thing here is that for both of these eras, everything would have been more about religion than anything else. So their works are dominated by that subject matter. There, why did our subject not like Montaigne, but like the other three painters or artists? I think that is the key to this story. One thing that seems to stick out from their biographies to me, and again, perhaps I am wrong, is that so Montaigne was the last of them. So he was more of a Renaissance painter than the other three. He was probably, at least from what I can find about these four artists, the least pious type of individual among them. He was more of a gruff guy. So it might be that what the communist here is observing is a sharp dichotomy between the lifestyle that Montaigne lives, being kind of gruff, and the lifestyle that he portrays in his art, which is piety, versus the other three artists who were more pious and were presenting piousness in their art, meaning that their realism, their real life, was very close to their artistic representations, versus Montaigne, whose art would have strayed a little bit um, from his life, meaning that Montaigne would have been, in the eyes of an idealist, like a communist running from a counter-revolution. That is an idealist type person. That is a person who is living by their ideals, regardless of what you think of them. So that type of hypocrisy from someone like Montaigne would have been less than ideal to him. Now, Montaigne was definitively a Renaissance painter. I believe the other three, depending on when you are classifying dates, were more Middle Ages. So there's also the possibility that what we are doing here is we are using the communist here to make a comment about the Renaissance being highly, or not, maybe not highly, but more highly scientific. You have the scientific method going on in the Middle Ages. You have a lot more of learning through empirical data versus the Middle Ages, which was a lot more driven by magic and a lot more driven by superstition, things like that. Could this be the communist stating that he does not like the scientific approach? He more relies upon sort of guttural instinct and things like that. Honestly, I'm not sure. This short story is itself a bit of a conundrum for me in a lot of ways, including letter C here under Lit Crit. Who is our protagonist? Who is the subject of our short story? If he's a nobody, then is he a nobody or is he a somebody, right? Does this make sense? Is he a nobody that is just going along, that is just migrating from where he was, or is he a somebody that is fleeing where he was from? If he's a nobody, then why would the whites have had a real interest in him anyway? If he's a somebody, why wouldn't the whites have killed him? If he was a nobody, why ship him around just to get arrested? Right? Why have the if he's just a regular quote unquote nobody that was just considering himself a communist, why ship him from between all of these countries? Why would he be needing to move like that? If he was a nobody, why would the Swiss arrest him on sight? If he is a somebody, how did he get that far in the first place? I think that there is a lot of mystery as far as who is our the subject of our story here. Now, the last thing as far as literary criticism is concerned, we've got to talk about the title. The title is The Revolutionist. There's really only two characters in this short story. We have the subject, who is the Hungarian that is fleeing persecution, and we have our speaker, who is the Italian who is disillusioned with the revolution. Who is the revolutionist? If it's the subject, if it's the Hungarian, he's not doing a very good job of revolutionizing. He's fleeing. If it is the Italian, he's not doing a very good job of being a communist, because when the Hungarian shows up and says, hey, it'll happen here, he replies with, well, I don't know. If the revolutionist is the Hungarian, he's doing a pretty good job, because there is a revolution and a counter-revolution in his country, both of these things being very active. If the revolutionist is our Italian speaker, then he's doing a very good job as a revolutionist, because he is able to stay in his country and host individuals fleeing persecution and ship them around. It's not until he goes to another country that he gets arrested. So they're holding it down in Italy, whether or not our speaker necessarily believes that they are doing all that amount of good or being productive. Is The Revolutionist an ironic title, stating that, oh, here's this revolutionary, all he's doing is running? Stating that here's this Italian revolutionary who doesn't even seem to believe in the revolution at hand. I think, personally, I prefer the ironic reading about the Hungarian. Basically saying, this is a revolutionist, but when push comes to shove, he's not willing to die for his ideas. He wants to run. I think that reading of an ironic reading of this title about the Hungarian sort of pokes at the entire idea of the revolution, because that idea of the revolution goes back to the very foundational text of communism. There's a specter haunting Europe, the specter of communism. This idea is so deeply seated into communism that to poke fun at the idea of a revolution is to poke fun at the idea of communism writ large. Now, the last talking point here from the writer's corner: it is almost impossible to talk about Hemingway on any level without mentioning how wild his economy with words is, how extremely precise that he can be. I talked a little bit earlier about how he wastes about 220 words of this 380 words saying the same thing in the first two paragraphs of this short story. Basically, the first three paragraphs of this short story, he's just going over the same type of details on different levels. Still, he is able to get out of this short story in 380 words, telling us about geography, telling us about classical art, telling us about revolutions, telling us about the culture in Italy post World War One. He's able to tell us all of these things in so short a time that we really have to question ourselves as writers. Look, in Absalom, William Faulkner has a 1,288 word sentence. I'm going to repeat that. In Absalom, William Faulkner wrote a 1,288 word sentence. One sentence, 1,288 words. That is nearly 3.5 times the length of this entire short story from Faulkner giving us one sentence. Now, it is known as the longest run-on sentence in the English language, or at least in the American English language. I don't know about the Brits, or the Australians. Do they write in Australia? I don't know. This is so economic. This is so sparse that everything that is actually happening in this sentence, in this short story, golly, everything that actually happens on the page in this short story, probably 98% of it is just fact telling. Meaning that what we have to do is fill in the rest by our own prejudices, fill in the rest with our own opinions, fill in the rest with our own ambiguities brought into the short story. And in that way, this short story will be different not only with every person who reads it, but for every person every time that they read it. So that's it. That's all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. This is, again, the 14th video in the Hemingway read-along series. We're currently going through Carrie by Stephen King. We're currently going through a couple other Stephen King books if I ever get off my butt and finish them. We just finished up Dubliners by James Joyce, so there are playlists on the channel for all of that stuff as well. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. So consider hitting that subscribe button in order to stick around for more content in the future. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.